So, as we all know, the Portland Trail Blazers have had a relatively eventful trade deadline. They have moved Robert Covington, Norman Powell, and CJ McCollum, and it appears as though they are going to make some sweeping, overwhelming changes. Doesn't even appear as though that's exactly what's happening. And moving those players, they did not get a lot in return in terms of winning right now. Really, they got draft capital and young players. Now, these moves have not surprised me. The Norman Powell one surprised me in how bad it was, but in terms of direction, none of this has surprised me. However, it appears that my interpretation, as well as what is a majority of people's interpretation of what these trades signify, isn't necessarily correct. Because after the CJ trade was reported, Adrian Wojnarowski proceeded to tweet something that said this: Portland's plan is to fully reshape the roster around Damian Lillard now. Portland created a $21 million trade exception today, potentially $60 million in salary cap this summer, multiple draft picks and assets via the Pels and Clippers trades, and they plan to pursue high-end talent now, not retreat. So the future of the Blazers is still kind of up in the air in terms of what they're going to do with Damian Lillard, as it was when I made a video on the topic 2 weeks ago. However, there's really two things. One, there is new information in terms of what they're doing going forward because some of the trades have been made. And then two, I want to actually talk about what a Damian Lillard trade looks like if that's what actually is going to come of this, which is what I believe inevitably it will be. So let's talk about it. If you are watching this video, there is a 50-50 chance as to whether or not you are subscribed to this channel. So if you fall into the 50% of people who are not subscribed, I would really appreciate it if you changed that if you enjoy today's video. And if you enjoy today's video, drop a like on it as well, as it helps it perform better in the YouTube algorithm. Also, new deep dive out. If you haven't watched it already, it's a really good video and I'd appreciate it if you did so. That'll be pinned comment, tag above, what's the other one? Description. Yeah, so check those out. So the idea with the notion of standing packed with Damian Lillard in spite of the fact that you made these trades is that these trades did actually give you some assets to trade later on, as well as giving you a shit ton of cap space and a really big trade exception. The Blazers have actually been rumored to be talking to the Pistons about Jeremy Grant, and they could very well end up getting him with that exception and then the assets on top of it, obviously. But where the problem lies is that you're doing this with 2022's free agency class in mind, and it's not a particularly great selection, both in talent as well as the fact that all of the really good players are guards. And these players that they could feasibly get are not significant upgrades over CJ and Powell's combined contribution with the two of them. But let's just say that they use this trade exception and sign Jeremy Grant, or trade for Jeremy Grant, and they use that money for filler, as well as trading like 2 first-round picks, future first-round picks, not their one from this year. Although I think that gets complicated because they have like protection backups, but I think there's workarounds for that. I'm not entirely sure, but let's just say that's what happens. Then let's say they sign Bradley Beal. Looking at the free agents that are available in 2022 for max contract contributions, really Bradley Beal is the only guy that I could see that would both be an upgrade over the likes of CJ and Norman Powell, as well as feasible, because like James Harden's not going to Portland. I don't necessarily love this because I feel like Beal and Dame is close enough to Beal and CJ that it doesn't make a drastic difference, but it's still an upgrade. Then they trade Anthony Simons and their lottery pick and presumably get some other star-ish caliber player at the very least. Then they sign a handful of good role players, trade some of their assets and picks along with that, and they definitely are in a decent place. But I am ultimately arriving to the same conclusion when I did this last time. It's just not enough. Like, you're gonna be in the contender category, sure, but you're going to be in the contender category like the Jazz are contenders, not like the Warriors are contenders. And still feel as though like a year or two of that really is not better than going in the direction of the rebuild, being that the rebuild that you could start could be such a good rebuild. It'd be one thing if the flip side rebuild wasn't great, but like the rebuild they could do is off to an immaculate start with Anthony Simons, their lottery pick, some of the young players they just traded for, and the fact that they're going to have 2 lottery picks now if the Pelicans don't make the playoffs, or at the very least a mid-first round pick, you're in a really good position to rebuild right now. And ultimately, 2 years of being like the Utah Jazz, I would rather just go in this rebuild direction. Even though Dame and trying to get that championship roster around him is something he spent the last decade doing, at this point, I think this is a sunken cost type of situation. You've lost. Just deal with it. So let's talk about what at this point I think is the right move, and what I want to see Portland do, what I want to see happen for Damian Lillard, and what I want to see just for the sake of the league being interesting, because when superstar players are on the move, the league is always more interesting. And that's Damian Lillard being traded. So decided I was going to spend the rest of this video pretty much just eliminating the teams that really can't trade for him, and then look at the teams that actually could, and then what those packages would be, and then I'm going to rank those trade packages. And those trade packages are not necessarily a ranking of what teams are most likely to get Dame, but the teams that have the best offers available. Some teams would be more interested in him than others, so even if one team has a better offer, they might be less inclined to give that offer than another team. But trade stuff, it gets complicated. Also, another thing that's worth mentioning, these moves could end up being 3, 4, 5 team trades for all we know. That's usually what ends up happening with these superstar caliber players, and all of these trade scenarios I am proposing is essentially just 2 teams. Anything further than that is speculating, so can't really throw that out there, but just saying these are the kind of hauls from an individual team that the Blazers could get for Dame. Now, as for what a Dame trade looks like, first and foremost, you have to get the fundamental stuff out of the way. He's going to be moved this offseason, so that means you are operating on his $42.5 million annual salary, so you have to match that amount of money in the trade. And in terms of Dame's actual value, I think him with 3 years left on his contract on a supermax at the age of 32 by the time the next season starts, his value is not exactly his highest ever, but it's still Dame, and he's going to go for quite a lot. So I imagine the packages would look something like one really good young player with either who's really good now or has a lot of potential going forward, a few other young players to fill it out, and then a couple of first-round picks, the amount of first-round picks depending on the value of the players, and vice versa, and then whatever the salary filler is necessary if you have to throw in contracts to make it work. Or there's potentially a world where it's literally just like one young player and then a million first-round picks and salary filler in like a Paul George-esque move, but I wouldn't bet on that. Now, going down the list of teams to trade for him, the first thing we can do is eliminate teams that have a good guard now who is in a similar-ish tier or will be going forward. That eliminates the Warriors, let's just say the Nets, even though the future of both of their guards is a little bit up in the air, but let's just throw them out there. Also, they don't have the assets anyways, so you might as well just get them off the list one way or the other. The Memphis Grizzlies, the Suns, the Hawks, and then we get to the potential players, which are the Hornets with LaMelo and Cade Cunningham with the Detroit Pistons. Obviously, LaMelo and Cade are nowhere near Dame right now, but they're going to be, hopefully, in the future, and both of those franchises are going to be betting on that, and they're not going to trade for Dame as a result. Then we can eliminate teams that are rebuilding to the point where Dame really makes no sense for them. The Pacers, the Wizards, the Magic, the Rockets, the Thunder, the Spurs, and the Kings. The Kings aren't actually rebuilding, but I don't feel like, I guess they're trying to win with the Sabonis move. I don't know what the fuck the Kings are, but they're not getting involved here. Fuck the Kings, seriously, I'm still annoyed with them with the Halliburton thing. That's a fresh wound. Then we can eliminate teams that are completely dry on assets. That removes the Lakers. I put them in the thumbnail for the views, and that is literally it. I have no shame. The Utah Jazz, unless they were going to do a Donovan Mitchell trade, but I doubt that would be even feasible unless Donovan Mitchell himself asked out, at which point that might actually be the best possible move for the Blazers. And then the Clippers, the Bucks, the Mavericks because of their inability to trade future first-round picks. So that leaves us with 10 teams that both could take Damian on in terms of the positioning of the team, is a good enough team that it makes sense to trade for him right now, and would have the assets to potentially make a actual push for him. Those 10 teams are the Celtics, the Knicks, the Sixers, the Raptors, the Bulls, the Cavs, the Heat, the Nuggets, the Wolves, and the New Orleans Pelicans. All of these teams have some sort of draft capital and or a handful of really good young players that have a lot of upside going forward, but the degree of quality of trade does vary pretty drastically between 1 through 10. So let's get into their potential packages. The Celtics' best offer would be Jaylen Brown, Robert Williams, Romeo Langford, and Aaron Nesmith, as well as, let's say, 2 or 3 unprotected first-round picks, because that is quite a bit of young assets. In terms of caliber of player, Jaylen Brown is the best player of all of these trades here. Robert Williams is actually not that far behind on that list. He's probably like 7 or 8, but another really, really good young player. Aaron Nesmith is someone who potentially could be a good player. Romeo Langford barely has seen NBA time, but still same thing. But I think that's a pretty good haul for Damian Lillard. For the Knicks, they would have to offer RJ Barrett as well as Cam Reddish and either Obi Toppin or Emmanuel Quickley. I feel like the Knicks would rather hold on to one of those two rather than and then give a first-round pick instead rather than trading both of them, because that's just a lot of players to move. It's not about like it's too much for Dame. It's just like 5 players on the move. So I feel like they'd rather just keep one of them and then just throw in a pick instead, and then 4 first-round picks and Evan Fournier as salary filler. The Sixers are difficult to speculate on because Harden to Philly very much seems like a real thing that's going to happen, but assuming that that is off of the table, let's just say Ben Simmons, Tyrese Maxey, and 3 first-round picks. Actually, Ben Simmons is probably better than Jaylen Brown. I don't know, I feel people will go back and forth on that. Ben Simmons is very, very controversial. Don't know if you knew that. The Raptors are weird because you kind of have to trade Fred VanVleet, but I don't imagine Portland would want him in a rebuilding situation, so you'd have to send him to a third team for young players and or picks to give to Portland, and then you just give them OG and like 3 of your own first-round picks. With OG and then assume Fred gets like 2 first-round picks and a young player, and that goes to Portland as well. That's, you know, a pretty sizable return, even though you're only getting OG as the player. The Bulls do not have a particularly strong trade. It would be Lonzo probably to a third team for assets, Patrick Williams, Kobe White, Ayo Dosunmu, and then the Blazers pick back. This one's pretty weak, but I feel as though it's enough assets to not be ignored here. Maybe Lonzo gets you 2 first-round picks, and that's 3 really good high upside young players and 3 first-round picks. It's the worst trade available of all these 10 teams, but it's also not an awful return, all things considered, because I think people would be surprised that the Bulls have a little bit more to offer than you might think. But they can't trade their future first because of the Stepien rule, and it's just unfortunate timing there. The Cavs, like the Raptors, are awkward because they would have to put Darius Garland in the move, Isaac Okoro, Kevin Love's salary, and like 2 first-round picks, maybe 3. Though personally, if I was Cleveland, I would just not do this. I very closely almost put them in the same category as the Hornets and the Pistons, where you want to view the long-term goal with that guard, but I just feel like Garland's ceiling wasn't close to LaMelo and Cades, and that's not a knock on fucking Garland, because I've been a huge Darius Garland guy ever since he's been drafted. So I was pretty happy that he's been as good as he is, but his ceiling is not LaMelo or Cade, and I said both of those ceilings are similar to a Dame ceiling, so not quite there. But with the Cavs team as a whole, I would personally just stick with that and not make a move for Dame, especially with his age and the difference of age with the rest of the roster. I'd rather just have the young point guard personally. For the Heat, it would be Tyler Hero, Kyle Lowry to a third team, and then like 4 firsts from Miami on top of whatever you would get for Kyle Lowry. The Nuggets would probably have to move either both Murray and MPJ or one of them, and then every pick they can possibly trade, as well as like Bones Highland and Zeke Naji. The Wolves would have Dame tomorrow if they offered Anthony Edwards, but presuming they don't do that, D'Lo, Jaden McDaniels, Naz Reid, and all of their future first is not a horrible package. And the Pelicans would move Brandon Ingram, Jackson Hayes, Kira Lewis, Trey Murphy, and let's say 4 first-round picks. But they also would only do a move like this if they felt like Zion's health seemed a little bit more guaranteed for the future. So, all of those trade packages in mind with those top 10 potential teams, here is the ranking of those actual trade packages to me. I would go with the Sixers, the Celtics, the Knicks, the the Cavs, the Nuggets, the Raptors, the Pelicans, the Heat, the Wolves, and the Bulls in that order. So that is what the trade market for Dame could actually look like if that actually is what ends up going down. Hopefully it is, because I am tired of this never-ending story. Shout out to Rudy for editing this video, but that is the end of this video. Please be sure to like and subscribe for more NBA content like this, and cue the outro music.